Hello, everyone. Welcome to Research Talk's Qualitative Scholar Conversations. I'm Maietta, president of Research Talk, and today my colleagues Paul Mihas and Jeff Petruzzelli have with us Elaine Keane, who is teaching at our Qualitative Research Summer Intensive this year. The course she's going to be presenting is Introduction to Grounded Theory, a Constructivist Approach, and that's Thursday and Friday, July 25th and 26th. So I mentioned I'm president of Research Talk. I just wanted my colleagues just to give a brief introduction, and then we will begin our conversation with Elaine. So, Paul.
Yes, I'm Paul Mihas. I'm the Assistant Director of Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research at the Odum Institute for Research in Social Science at UNC Chapel Hill. And I've also been with Research Talk since 2001 as a consultant.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Jeff?
Hello, I'm Jeff Petruzzelli, also with Research Talk. I'm a qualitative research specialist here, and like Paul, I've been with Research Talk since 2001.
Great. And Elaine, we're so excited to have you here, and it feels like we've been kind of looking forward to you joining our scholar team for a long time, and we're so happy that it's happening this year. So we wanted just to have you, us to get to know you a little more, and have you, for the people watching the video, for them to get to know you a little bit more. So in your kind of who is, if you could tell us not only a little bit about yourself, but your evolution as a qualitative researcher, that would be wonderful.
Sure, Ray, and thank you for the introduction. I too am delighted and very, very excited to be here, thrilled to be joining this brilliant team, and really excited to do my course later on this summer. So as you've introduced me, I'm Elaine Keane. I'm Associate Professor of Sociology of Education and Research Methods in the School of Education here in the University of Galway. We're right on the west coast of Ireland. My areas, as I said, are sociology of education and research methods. So I teach those across all of our programs. We do a lot of teacher education in our school, but not just that. So yeah, I'm here more than 20 years now, to my horror, when I added it up. But I'm teaching even longer than that because in my former life I was a school teacher. So I have been teaching quite a long time. My research focus and my teaching focus, where I am right now in the university, really relate to a number of different areas. They include things like social class in education, intercultural education, teacher diversity, widening participation into the professions, and of course, qualitative research methods, particularly constructivist grounded theory. So that's just a little bit about me. Let me see. My evolution as a qualitative researcher, I think that's a really interesting question. I suppose, let me think, if I think back, I have been doing qual research now in some form for probably like 24, 25 years. You know, like a lot of people starting off, you know, at kind of master's level and bringing it forward from there. But I have to admit, and I remember my very first encounter with qualitative research, and, you know, something about my very first taste of it being well and truly hooked. There was something about it, even the philosophical debates that I know students can struggle with a little bit at the start, that just grabbed me and made me inherently excited or something in a really nerdy way that I know a lot of listeners will relate to. So as I said, yeah, look, I used it in my own master's and subsequently in a research assistant position. But it was really in my doctoral work that I started to immerse myself in the qualitative domain. And interestingly, interestingly to me at least, I actually originally was really attracted by phenomenology and was really fascinated reading about the different variants and the schools and the philosophical debates, you know. And it was actually through a phenomenological research design that I initially encountered grounded theory. But look, you know, once I started reading about it, talk about well and truly bitten by the bug, you know, I was utterly seduced by Glaser and Strauss's writings. The thought of coming up with a theory from data was just so exciting. But even then, I didn't quite know why I was uncomfortable, but I was a bit uncomfortable about what I later understood were the more kind of objectivist underpinnings. But around that time, Kathy's work really hadn't started being known. Not much was published on the constructivist version. So I was a little bit uncomfortable. And it was only really later on in my PhD, when Kathy's work started to become known, that I had the great...
Yeah, just for the benefit of folks listening, Kathy Charmaz.
Apologies. Yes. Kathy thankfully became a great friend of mine. So yes, first name basis, but you're absolutely right. Kathy Charmaz. So I had the honor of attending several days training with her a long time ago during my PhD, but I also did a week's training with Barney Glaser in New York in 2008, which was both of the trainings I did with both of them were absolutely amazing. But I did firmly position myself in the constructivist camp after all of that training. And shortly after I completed my PhD, I actually presented, I remember, at a methodological conference, and Kathy Charmaz was keynoting at it. She came to my session, to my horror and delight simultaneously.
Yeah.
And afterwards came up to talk to me and said, you know, that she was interested in collaborating. So I was thrilled and scared, of course. But look, that started a long, fruitful and really enjoyable, not just academic collaboration, but, you know, I was really happy to say a friendship until her really sad death in the summer of 2020. You know, Kathy was an incredible, I know you know this, like she taught this course before, an incredible scholar, an incredible mentor to, you know, so many researchers internationally, and a real friend. I certainly really miss her, and I have dedicated my book. I have a book out on grounded theory. Well, sorry, it's in production right now. On grounded theory, constructivist grounded theory in educational research. Robert Thornberg is my co-editor. But we've dedicated the book to her memory. So, you know, I've been really active really since and throughout the years in grounded theory. I still use it myself, of course, in my own research and my publications with my doctoral students, but I am really involved in trying to develop the method. I think like one of my main foci in my academic publications about grounded theory has kind of centered on trying to develop the method and to be clear about constructivist adaptations to the method and what that actually looks like in practice. So, you know, while still, of course, remaining faithful to the core purpose of grounded theory in relation to conceptualizing and theorizing. So that's kind of been my focus, and I was really honored to be invited by Kathy and Norman Denson, who we also, of course, lost, unfortunately, last year, to teach grounded theory at the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So I've been doing that since 2015, and that's where I had the honor of meeting Paul and lots of other colleagues, and really developing my links in terms of grounded theory and constructivist grounded theory with colleagues internationally. But I've been doing workshops in this area throughout Ireland, throughout the EU, and in the US for many years now, in person and online, you know, writing articles, doing books. And a few months ago, very excitingly, Robert and I signed contracts with Sage. We have been contracted to actually write the next edition of Kathy's Constructivist Grounded Theory with Kathy posthumously. So we are right now starting a big body of work on how to, I won't say fill her shoes, because that will never be possible, but trying to find ways of maintaining her voice, and furthering her vision, really, in terms of constructivist grounded theory into the future.
It's beautiful. So it really is continuing the work she started, and you know, and she was committed in her own work. When you look at of course, someone rarely buys every edition of a book that someone constructed, but in the case of Kathy's work, you really do see the evolution of her thinking. And when she taught with us, as you know, we're happy to have you kind of coming in and, you know, like you will with the book, picking up here for us in that work. It's just so fabulous. You know, I'm listening to you and kind of moving through, and one of the things we always ask folks is to tell us a little bit about the origins of, you know, the course. You've given us a lot about that, but Paul and Jeff, I think I'm going to go off the board a little bit, Elaine. And you talked about your coming to Qual. You talked about phenomenology, coming to grounded theory, and then moving toward a grounded theory, constructivist approach. We ask our scholars to tell us after the workshop what they would love people to take and how they would like their work to kind of evolve. So if you envision someone having finished your course, what you like to see them integrate content-wise from the course? We're going to work a little backwards here today, if that's comfortable for you. But tell us, yeah, if somebody sits through and they learn from you for these 2 days on July 25th and 26th, what do you envision them being able to integrate in their own work after they depart?
Well, one thing that they're going to know for sure is if they should be using grounded theory or constructivist grounded theory in their project, because often people are unsure. Should I use the full methodology? Can or should I use parts of the methodology in a wider framework? How suitable is this for the project that I have in mind, and so on? So one of the things that I do try to do during a course is to personalize and to allow opportunities for participants to tell me about their project and to see, well, okay, how would grounded theory and or constructivist grounded theory fit here? Will this work? So certainly I want them to be able to tell, yes, this is going to fit or not. And secondly, and very importantly, that if they are going to use it, precisely what are their next steps? Because of course, participants come to courses like this in various different stages of readiness and of preparation and sometimes of progress, in fact. So I do see it as one of my jobs in workshops like this is to ascertain where somebody is and to bring them forward appropriately. There's a few specifics, I suppose. One of the things that I would like them to, and that participants will be able to do at the end, is to identify opportunities to develop and apply constructivist adaptations in their study. Because from the very beginning, I've always said that, you know, while the kind of philosophical underpinnings of constructivist grounded theory were beautifully elucidated by Kathy, I was never always that sure about, well, what does that mean in practice about what you do in your study to make it constructivist? So that's a lot. I've been doing a lot of work in that regard. And that's one of the things that I'll help participants to do in the context of their study, to actually identify those opportunities and to try and design them and to make sure that it's aligned to that constructivist emphasis, you know, with the underlining kind of pragmatist philosophy. So that's one thing. And I suppose as part of that, to understand why that the original objectivist kind of underpinning, you know, from the old days of grounded theory, if you like, why that is problematic. Another big, I'm sorry, Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to check in a little bit more about what you just said. And we also want to check in and see what Paul and Jeff are thinking. But when I love this move that you're making and this whole thing kind of like in the work, when you're actually doing it, how do you make moves to, you know, have it become more constructivist? Do you have an example of something in, you know, people's progress when they're doing the project, of what that might look like?
Absolutely. So there's two key things that I focus on with participants, and they're sort of related, to be honest. One is how to engage in and then apply principles of critical reflexivity, particularly, but not only, relating to aspects of research or positionality in the study. So not just who, you know, writing about and journaling about who am I and why that matters, but then taking that into the study and to see how do I actually apply that? And of course, one of the ways that I've been kind of experimenting with in different ways over the years is ways of involving then participants actively in the research design. You know, ways of sharing, for example, the developing theory with our participants and getting their feedback on, you know, certainly aspects of research design at the start, but also more intensively as you go through the study. One of the things that we do, for example, in grounded theory, sorry, I'll need to explain this here just for listeners' benefits, is of course that theoretical sampling is a really key feature, defining feature, in fact, of grounded theory, all versions. And in fact, it's the aspect that's often least well done, sometimes not done at all. So that's something I put a lot of emphasis on, is training people what it is, what it isn't, and how to do it and when to do it. So one of the things that we do is we, of course, you know, when we're developing our conceptualizations, when we see that they're incomplete in some way, we design a further foray into the field to collect more empirical data to fill those conceptual gaps. And one of the things I've been playing with over time is using those theoretical sampling returns to the field also as an opportunity to share the developing theory with participants as a way of actively involving them. So that is one way that I've been kind of working with trying to incorporate constructivist principles right into the very nature and process of grounded theory procedure.
It's beautiful that you give such explicit permission and principled theoretical guidance on, yes, forays back into the field are not only okay, but encouraged, helpful, and fit, but also this idea of writing. And this is one of the things we loved with Kathy, and people always in her courses felt relief and really felt like they gained a lot from realizing writing isn't something that happens just toward the end, that the thought about the development and the content, it really kind of fits and flows. It's wonderful to know that's a gift to be giving to folks. I wanted just to check in and just hear, Paul, for you, just tell us where you're at in the conversation and what more you'd like to hear.
Sure. So Elaine, I know that sometimes graduate students and junior researchers are intimidated by grounded theory, and they've heard about it for years, and they also may not know a lot about constructivism. I'm just wondering how your course kind of demystifies all this and kind of puts people at ease about something that seems maybe larger than their skills.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's part of what we need to do in courses like this, really, isn't it? Is put people at their ease. I think people can be intimidated by it. I think it's the notion of theory and developing theory and what is theory, and this idea they think they have to develop a big theory that solves a major issue in the world. I suppose one of the things that I'm quite clear about in the course is explaining what theory is. And also expectations around that. So in grounded theory, what do we mean by conceptualization? What do we mean by theorization? And I suppose to reassure them and to show them that there are actually very explicit steps that are conducted in a sequential manner that we will explain to you and share with you in a clear manner about how you go from A to Z. Because I think sometimes parts of that process are quite amorphous, perhaps not made very clear, even in the numerous textbooks that are out there. So it is something that I like to be actually very clear and explicit about. So it's something that I put a lot of emphasis on, actually, is really going through different stages of coding and showing them how we go from raw data, for example, in a transcript, through various different stages to coming up with what we identify as a conceptualization. And I suppose reassurance in that regard that, they're not expected to come up with some grand social theory, and even explaining the different levels of theory, I find tends to reassure people.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
It's this nice tightly wrapped connection between the principles again and the practice. It's wonderful, and for you to point to the word theory as the intellectual block people face, it's that insight I think is right on, and the solution of this tightly wrapped presentation. I think you're right on to that. Hey Jeff, for you, what curiosities are developing for you as we chat?
Yeah, I just talked a little bit about writing a little while ago. So I was just wondering, Elaine, if you could talk a little bit about the role of memoing in your work, and maybe how you'll talk about it in the class. That's something we really preach memo writing in our own work. So I'm curious to hear your take on it.
Absolutely. And Jeff, it's as you've identified, it's absolutely crucial as well in grounded theory. So, I know, Glaser, his famous dictum about memoing is no matter what you're doing, if you've got an idea about your data, stop and memo. So that's how central to the whole endeavor of grounded theory Glaser felt memoing was. So yeah, memoing is such a core procedure. It's all about writing about your data. And what's really important about memoing in all forms of grounded theory is that we don't use it to record our thoughts. It's actually seen to be generative. of our thoughts and of the developing theory. And I always am fascinated by, when I'm trying to work out something, how much my ideas actually develop through writing. So certainly we'll be doing exercises in the course on memoing. I'll be sharing examples of memos at different stages of development, because I think that's really important. I think often textbooks tend to share the final version of writing or of memos or whatever the piece may be. And that's quite intimidating, I think, for beginning or early career researchers. So what I like to do is to show them at different stages of development, to show that actually, you know, nearly all researchers, we start off with something perhaps rather mundane, perhaps rather descriptive. Even Glaser said at the beginning, sometimes he stories the data, you know, or used to story the data rather. Unfortunately, we lost Glaser in the last couple of years as well. And then over time, through our thinking and through certain techniques that I'll obviously be working on with the participants, that our writing does become more abstract and more theoretical in orientation. So absolutely memoing and also diagramming, I would say, from a constructivist perspective as well, would be very much part of the techniques that I will be focusing on with the participants.
Beautiful. That's one of the things we share is I don't know if you saw this summer, Allison Hamilton and I are doing a class just on diagramming as we.
Okay. I must look into that. No, I wasn't aware.
And you're welcome to sit in if you'd like. But what are the other things that, as you were just talking, that Jeff had mentioned that we really talk a lot about memo writing? Paul has a course where he thinks about the engagement of memo writing in sync with categorization, coding, and those things.
Yeah.
We find that lots of folks, when they're composing a memo, and I'm purposely not saying memoing because they're not getting the ing part, that they kind of stop and they wrote it. Just as we have a few more minutes, but what is the engagement with the words you put down as you're memoing, going back and reviewing? You talked about how things are generative. And I think it's important to underscore that for folks, for them to know that, no, you didn't just compose something that's stop and done. You've left something for you to re-engage.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, it's generative, and it's emphasizing that you start sometimes with a blank page. You start, you know, you add some basic ideas. That may be all you have for now. Then you walk the dog, you do your day job, you do whatever, but you get an idea later on, and it's important to come back to it, and that it develops over time. And I suppose it's helping people to understand, to have confidence in that, and to allow themselves the freedom to free write. In fact, I mean, Kathy used to talk a lot about this, and I know in other workshops that she did internationally, not only did she do grounded theory workshops, she frequently supplemented those with writing workshops, and she was a big fan of free writing. Just let yourself write about your codes, let yourself write about your data, forget about the audience, this is for you. So I really encourage my doctoral students to do this as well, and once they feel the pressure is kind of off, I find it's amazing that what we all come up with to just write, and some of it we dump later, other stuff we develop further, you know. But in grounded theory, of course, it's not a question of just doing that from your head. What we're doing through, and of course I'll be talking about these logics in the workshop, is through that notion of abductive logic, we may sort of hypothesize in our memo writing, I wonder if, and of course we go back to our data to check. And if we don't have the data to answer, we go back into the field and we get more data. So it's all very, for me, grounded theory is not just iterative. It's so inherently intertwined with the different steps. And I think that's why it can be somewhat intimidating and confusing as well for participants, because they hear about all these key features, and yet sometimes the sequence isn't necessarily comprehensible that easily. So yeah, I have a big focus on explaining it in practice so that they can really kind of comprehend the sequence in a more meaningful way.
It really just kind of, as we draw, unfortunately, to a close here, we have to wrap, but we could keep talking to you forever. You know, there is this view, especially newer researchers, they really want it to be sequenced in the same way for every researcher, for every project. They think that adds legitimacy, things of that sort. So what you've been describing, what you lay out in your description, and knowing a bit about, you know, your content, is really this, well, no, this is kind of, let's detail what the process looks like in the field, and, pursuing curiosities and letting those direct. It's, what you're doing when and how. It seems like you're just really building a wonderful experience for people that I think they're going to have wonderful ahas that both allow them to define what they'll do when, but give them permission to think of it and reconceive of what the process looks like as they're applying the work. It's just great.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And there's inherent flexibility in the grounded theory process as well. And of course, it's inherently contextual. What is going to work in the context of the particular project? And look, we all know real field work is real messy in real life. How it's written up often looks a little bit different, but the reality of real field work is messy. And, I make no bones about that. And I share examples and problems from the field and things that I still wrestle with. And I think that honesty is really important for us all as researchers.
Beautiful. And the messy is good and exciting. And
Yeah.
So running from messy and fearing messy, embrace it. So,
Exactly.
That's so wonderful. Well, great. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to July. And we also will, for folks, just as FYI, Elaine talked about different books that are out, different books that are coming out, things of that sort. We'll include those in where you find the link to this conversation. So you'll be able to see those. We'll have those ready. And even I'll look forward to the ones you talked about that you, like continuing the conversation with with Kathy's book as well. So. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Jeff.
Great.
Thank you.